Okay, folks, welcome to the first of 3 critical conversations that are happening this week. Can I just ask, if you aren't one of my colleagues and panel members tonight, can you switch off your camera and your mic? Please use the chat to participate. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat. We'd love you to share your comments, share your thoughts, share your questions. Agree, disagree, do whatever you would like to do. I am reliably informed that you can use stickers and likes and loves and things to add to the feeling of people being in the room with us today. So please feel free to explore the chat and add comments or endorse and enhance the comments that are already there. My name is Sarah. I am delighted to have been invited to host these critical conversations. As I said, this is the first of 3. Tomorrow night we are exploring empowerment, and on Thursday night leadership, but tonight our theme is curriculum. As a coach, as a psychologist and as an educator, I've worked across the system of Scottish education, both nationally and locally, but I'm not connected to any of the large organisations rather, but I do love conversations, which was my next point. I'm delighted to be hosting because I do love conversations. I love the power of conversations. I love how we connect in conversations, and I love what they bring to our understanding of the world around us and the system that we are working in. And I do co-host an independent podcast called Changing Conversations. So I've gone from changing conversations to critical conversations tonight, but I'm sure both will be equally powerful, and I look forward to engaging in that critical conversation with my colleagues that are here with me tonight, but also with those of you who are joining, I hope, from home. I hope no one is still in school or in an office somewhere, but I hope you've made it home. I hope you have a comfy seat. I hope you have a cup of tea, and I hope you're ready to engage. We realise it's tea time, so there will be stuff probably happening around you, but we're grateful that you're here, and we can see that there's lots of you here with us tonight. So we have an hour together. We are going to explore, we're going to challenge, we're going to question, and we are going to learn all around the theme of curriculum. As I said, please use the chat to contribute and engage in that conversation. But first of all, let me introduce my colleagues tonight, who I think are all on screen. Yes, they are. And I do have this written down because my memory is not that good, and I would definitely forget something. So Ollie Bray is with us tonight. Ollie is Strategic Director with Education Scotland. I'm sure he's had a busy day. And at Education Scotland, he has responsibility for curriculum, pedagogy and innovation, and he brings to this role a wide and varied experience, including time with Sport Scotland, time as head teacher of King Eustace High School, and most recently Global Director of Connection, Play and Education at the Lego Foundation. I'm impressed by some of your titles there, Ollie. Certainly lots of things included and a wide spectrum. We also have Nushat Uthmani, who is a primary teacher in Glasgow. She specialises in the teaching of global citizenship and anti-racist education. She's a member of the Scottish Government's Race Equality and Anti-Racism in Education stakeholder group, and she is the founder of the Global Citizenship Education Scotland Practitioner Network. We also have Dr. Lynn McNair, who, by the looks of it, is managing to sit outside tonight. I'm quite impressed with that and a little bit jealous. I would certainly not have trusted my technology outdoors tonight. But welcome to Lynn, who is the head of Cowgate Under 5 Centre in Edinburgh. She's also a lecturer in early childhood practice and Froebel Research Fellow at the University of Edinburgh. And Lynn would say that her belief that children are rich, active, resourceful beings comes from being the mother of her 2 children and what she has learned as she's observed them playing freely as children. So the way of being with children, trusting in them, their abilities and capabilities, is where she puts her energy into her work with children today. We also have Lawrence Finley. Lawrence started his career as a teacher of modern languages in Edinburgh, and after working as PT and DHT in various schools, he became head teacher at Forest Academy in Murray before moving on to various senior local authority roles, and is now Director of Education and Children's Services for Aberdeenshire Council. We have also Dr. Suzanne Ziedike. Suzanne, I'm sure, is probably a very familiar face to many of us. She is a research scientist and is fascinated by babies' innate capacity to communicate. Suzanne has focused her work over the last 10 years on sharing what she calls the science of connection. We are born connected, and we have a need for emotional connection in order to live happy, healthy lives. Suzanne works closely with organisations throughout the world with the goal of increasing awareness of the decisions that we take about caring for children, because they are connected to our vision for the society that we wish to build. And last but not least, we have Bruce Robertson. Bruce is the rector of Berwickshire High School and has been working in education for almost 20 years. And he is the author of the Teaching Delusion trilogy. So the Teaching Delusion, Teaching Strikes Back, and Power Up Your Pedagogy. And I believe that he has the launch party for books 2 and 3 this weekend. So it's a very busy week for Bruce also. And in his spare time, if he has any, he's also a regular contributor to the Times Education Supplement. So it's lovely to have everybody here, and thank you for the little waves and the hellos that you managed to share with us, as we've all become accustomed to doing in this online space. And we were talking earlier about, what was it like when we were able to meet in rooms and see the faces of the people that we're engaging with, but this will do for now. So as I said, our theme for tonight is curriculum. There's certainly a lot we could explore and unpick within that framework, within that theme. But I suppose just to get us started, we know that we have tinkered, we have added, we have refreshed the narrative. We now have the OECD report, as well as, and I think it was 9 other reports that Gail Gorman mentioned this morning in her opening keynote. So there's a range of information, there's a range of data, there's a range of research out there. We know that reform is coming. It's on its way, but I suppose the question I'd like to start us off with, and I'd like us to start to explore, is how do we ensure that what we achieve is improvement rather than just more change? And Nazhut, I would like to ask you, if I could, just to come in and share your thoughts on that first question to get us started.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be part of this conversation. Thank you to everyone who is attending. I think that the first thing we would really need to ask ourselves is, what have we been doing all this time, and why have we been doing it, and whose purpose is it kind of meeting? We don't know what we need to improve on if we don't fully understand what the issues are. And for that, we need to be having longer conversations with all the people that are impacted by our curriculum. Of course, most of all, our pupils themselves, and what they see the curriculum to be, and how they want to take that forward. I think listening to views is important, but we also need to bring people on board with us to form that, to further form that curriculum better to suit everyone.
Mm-hmm. So who might we bring on board? Lawrence, I can see you nodding there.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I completely agree with the points there. Good evening, everyone. I think we need to reignite that passion and that debate in education that we had 20 years ago now, which really led to such a great outpouring of passion and commitment to redeveloping Scotland's curriculum, going right back to that focus on skills, those 4 capacities, the principles of curriculum design. I remember being so excited and enthused as a young DHT when the CFE documentation first landed on my desk about 2004. And that gave us a framework at that time to allow maximum local flexibility, maximum empowerment of the teaching profession. But then we started to get a bit flooded with E's and O's and benchmarks and other such things, and we've kind of just lost our way a little bit. We've kind of drowned within it all. But what I would say is that when I go to schools now, I see some great curriculum, I see some great innovation. So we're not starting from scratch, we're starting from a stronger place than we started from 20 years ago. Let's not throw it all out. Let's keep the change that worked. Let's talk to our learners, talk to our teachers, our professionals who know their communities and their kids best, and build on that and get back to what we were trying to achieve 20 years ago. We've got a real opportunity here not to tinker, but actually to keep what's worked and to really change what hasn't worked. Thanks.
I think that's an important point around not tinkering, but also appreciating what we do have. And I like the idea of that excitement and passion that we have, and we know is quite strong in Scottish education as well. What about from an early years perspective? Perhaps Lynn in particular, can I invite you in here? What's your thinking? Where are you? Oh, you're on mute. It was bound to happen at least once. There we go.
I think the key thing is that I absolutely agree with Lawrence. We've got an excellent curriculum and something that we really need to be very, very, very proud of. But I think the danger is that we segregate that curriculum, and I think we need to integrate it. And you know, particularly I'm thinking about the early years. So if we're seeing a child baking bread, we're not, you know, simply thinking, oh, they're learning maths, but it's all the other things that they're learning at that same time. And I think that we need to think about our curriculum in that kind of holistic way, like looking at all the different aspects that children are learning in particular ways. And we know that is happening. And sadly, there's this kind of pressure on us to segregate, you know, like, for example, we're now looking at the national kind of priorities are literacy, mathematics, and health and well-being. But if we look at it and so of course we could look at a child again. If I use the example of baking bread, of course we can look at that through literacy. We could say, oh well, they're following a sequence book. They're following the words to make the bread. They're knowing, and then numeracy. So they're learning how to weigh the resources they need to make the bread, the ingredients. But actually, we need to think about it bigger than that. So, you know, I feel that that's actually, so it's great having the kind of different areas. However, I think from an early years perspective, the most important thing is to see it as a holistic curriculum.
Mm-hmm. And thinking bigger, what does that look like? And that's not necessarily just for Lynn to respond to, but other perspectives perhaps.
Sarah, I could come in there perhaps. When I was thinking about our conversation tonight, I found myself thinking about the work of Simon Sinek, who talks about a golden circle. He talks about why you do something, how you do something, and what you do. And he's best known for thinking about businesses. But of course, businesses are just organizations. And so that applies to any organization. And it would be really easy in discussing the curriculum to get lost in what we deliver. Mm-hmm. But his warning is that if you start with what, you're not very effective. You need to start with why. And I know we might come on to talk a little bit about helping children to thrive. For me, that would be a why. What is the purpose of what we're trying to do in education? Mm-hmm. From my perspective, the thing that I would want to stress tonight is the how. Mm-hmm. If we do not keep relationships in mind, then it doesn't matter what we deliver. Young people and children won't take it in. It won't be as effective as we kind of fantasize that it will be. Because if they're not drawing on all the trauma research and the ACEs research, if they're not feeling safe in the classroom, then their body gets so stressed that they can't take in what we're trying to talk about. So if you don't meet their needs, it doesn't really matter what we teach them, if you wanted to say it in a strong way. And I find myself thinking about Marcus Rashford's efforts over the pandemic to try to get children fed. It now seems really obvious that if children are hungry, they can't really concentrate on learning. But you know what? There have been a lot of times in our history when we didn't focus on that, when apparently that wasn't obvious. And if we really got it, you know, as a whole UK, Marcus Rashford wouldn't need to have a campaign. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm just trying to stress that it's actually easy for us to forget that children's biological needs might block their ability to take in the content that we're trying to offer them. And so I guess my point is a really overarching one. If we don't start with how we do that, then it won't matter what we deliver at all. And I find that a really useful place to start from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thinking about how and why as opposed to just what. And I think that's a core theme that comes out of those many documents and conversations that we have seen. Can I ask Bruce and or Ollie, is there anything you would like to contribute or challenge around what does improvement look like rather than just change in this context? Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, I agree with what Suzanne said about the starting with why, and there definitely needs to be a conversation nationally about that and what the purpose of the curriculum is. I'm going to risk controversy at the moment and say that I don't think we do have a great curriculum in Scotland at the moment. I think we do have a great curriculum in some schools,
Okay.
but I don't think we have a great curriculum nationally. Going back to the how do we ensure improvement and not change, for me, it's about focusing on the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would look to different researchers and authors in education. Let's take Dylan Wiliam, for example. I think his book, Creating the Schools Our Children Need, is a wonderful, very important text that we need to come back to. In that, Dylan Wiliam would argue that there's really just two things that we need to focus on in schools. One is high quality pedagogy in the classroom, but the other is a content-rich curriculum. What he means by that really is a curriculum which is more specific than what we have in Scotland today. I think personally, one of the issues that we have is around the vagueness of the experiences and outcomes. It lends itself to different interpretations, and you can argue that there are some merits in that model. But when you look at what's actually happened in practice, you have an awful lot of schools that have become confused about what it is that they're meant to be teaching. I think we need more specificity in the curriculum, a common core to help ensure that there's equity in the system, which is not to say that I think every student should be taught exactly the same thing in every school. I don't think that. I think that there should be scope for personalisation and choice and taking in context, but we do need to consider a core. And that's probably most important at a cluster level when secondaries are working with primary schools and deciding what the core curriculum should be for that particular cluster and then sharing ideas broader. So focusing on a content-rich curriculum with more specificity than we currently have, for me, that would be very important.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to come in on the back of that?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's great, and thanks for the contributions, so far. And I agree with much has been said. I mean, I think Bruce's point about experience and outcomes is really interesting around that. But I think we also have to remember that when we think about the word curriculum in Scotland, we think about the totality of a young person's experiences in schools, and I think that we've still got a little bit of a way to help people understand that. I guess, to Bruce's point, that's why some schools have excellent curriculums and some schools are still working on that because we're not completely familiar with that definition yet. Because again, when we think about the totality of curriculum in schools, we think about curriculum and subjects, which is the E's and O's that Bruce was really strong on there. But also it's about the opportunities for personal achievement, the interdisciplinary learning and the ethos and life of the school, as well. And I guess also sort of linking back to that kind of original question around that, which was really around change. And this is just such an important question at the moment, because I think if we're going to evolve, any type of evolution is associated with change. But we're at that kind of critical moment now where we could evolve backwards or we could evolve forwards. So actually it's about what do we want to change? And then to Suzanne's point, that the how, are we going to do that? And that's why professional learning and leadership needs to be at the heart of this reform. And do you know what? I think that we missed out on that 15 years ago. We had a lot of professional learning around the content side of things and how things work, but not actually about how do you lead change and actually sort of try and take that forward. The other thing that I would say is that quite often when we think about change in schools, what we really mean is adding extra things. And that's actually the last thing that we want to be doing here. What we actually really want is professional learning and leadership around how do we actually take out the things that aren't working around that. So we've got this time and space for reflection, planning and everything else. And I'll finish on that point with, or this point with just maybe this, is that when you look through all of those recommendations, whether it's the 12 recommendations in the OECD report, or it's the 39 recommendations that Chief Inspector was talking about this morning, each one of those is associated with a change. If you read the reports, it's filled with the nuances of stuff that's working. And I have to say that I worry that if we address the changes, that's at the expense of what's working already around that as well. And that's why I think that we need to be really, really careful when we're thinking about recommendations versus considerations sort of moving forward.
You said you wanted to finish there, but I'm not going to let you. I'd like you to say a bit more about that. How do we do that then? There's a challenge in there. How do we do it? Can you take us forward a little bit?
So I think if we were I think if we were looking at the reports, for example, one of the biggest traps that we can just go to is either reading the summary, or reading the end, around that, or quite often the way that governance is set up these days is that one department or one organisation is responsible for one report. Now, that doesn't seem to be a particularly joined up and collegiate way of working. I think what we really need to do is go through the reports, in detail, almost scientific detail, where we're looking for areas of strength, we're looking for areas of weakness, we're looking for questions, and we're looking for recommendations. And then if we're able to sense check and identify themes, across those reports, and I'm not talking about themes that we've just made up, new education jargon that we've just created, but themes, to do with things that actually have already been sense checked within the profession, I think that we could very, very quickly come up with a list of recommendations, a list of projects, a list of implementation plans that would almost immediately send us on this journey of reform. And I think, so my last point within that as well is that, as you said, reform is on the way, but it's not here yet. So how do we lay the foundations for reform, for things that we need to be doing now to make sure that we're in a really, really strong place in a year's time or 2 years' time or whenever, this thing is going to happen?
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat before we kind of pick up and dig into some of that as well. There's a few comments and thumbs up for the idea that perhaps the 4 capacities are the why and the pedagogy is the how. There's also a couple of questions around, do we need to explore the why of the current reform? Are we clear on that? There's also a bit of a thread or a theme, I think, emerging around how we actually engage everybody in this process. So teachers, early years practitioners, children and young people themselves, parents and families. And I think that's kind of, there's been parts of that have come through in your contributions so far. So reform is not here yet, it's on its way. How do we place and prepare the foundations for that? What are the foundations for that? Suzanne, did you want to come in there?
Well, as I find myself thinking about the observations of David Cameron, who many of you will know, and I think here we're talking about his idea of breakable plates. He talks about what are the breakable plates. And how do you decide what the breakable plates are? How do you decide what to let go of? Because if you just layer more and more and more on top, everybody just gets exhausted and collapses. And he also talks about painting on wet walls, that we're very good at coming up with reforms, and we reform and paint over the wall before it's really had time to dry and to sink in and to embed in practice. And we make ourselves feel good by forever reforming without actually having a look at how that embedded. So I think that those are two, they're memorable because they're quite good quips. But if they're true, and I can see things, coming in the chat, then they give us a way to get a handle. So if I give one more example, I learned about Simon Sinek's work from the organization called Tigers, who some people may know. And Tigers delivers apprenticeships to young people, from the age of 16 up. Okay, can I be really frank? Many of those 16-year-olds had terrible experiences of Scottish education. Many of them turned up there feeling very bad about themselves. They'd been told to go for an apprenticeship because they wouldn't thrive doing anything else. So they deliver apprenticeships in construction and business administration and early years. Okay, so when you have young people, most often young women, turning up to do an early years apprenticeship, believing that they've done that because they weren't going to be very good at anything else, it doesn't bring the kind of curiosity and confidence that that you need to fully engage with the things that we now know about early years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just trying to say some edgy things that help us to look at how effective has been what we are delivering, whatever the curriculum that we've decided on at the moment. How effectively have we been able to deliver that in classrooms and schools? And if we haven't been able to do that, what has kept us from doing that? How can we have so many young people that have struggled in schools? And I don't just mean that schools are the only ones responsible for it. Those schools and those children grow up in communities. Mm-hmm. And they bring with them a whole history of educational experiences. So if your early years experience isn't good, and you get built into your stress system, the idea that schools are a scary place or not a place that tune in where you don't feel safe, then by the time that you're moving on to primary or secondary, you already have a big challenge for the staff who are in each of those later levels. Mm-hmm. So understanding, I think, basic information about human development, about how your biology functions and how you feel safe in a classroom and how relationships shape that experience. I can come back to that again and again till I get boring, but it is so fundamental. And yet I think that if we really got that as a system, you wouldn't have young people turning up at Tigers with that experience. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's helpful to ask the really edgy questions about, what are the breakable plates as we think about reform. I hope that is helpful for all that it's forever kind of umbrella stuff that I'm bringing.
Yeah. So I wonder then, colleagues, what are the breakable plates? What are we experiencing? What are we hearing about? What are the breakable plates? And perhaps our colleagues in the chat might want to share what they perceive the breakable plates to be as well. So who's got some breakable plates handy that they want to share with us? Bruce, have you got any breakable plates there?
I don't know about breakable plates, but I want to go back to the why, if that's okay. What is the purpose of the curriculum? I've said earlier, and others have said the same thing, that there needs to be a national debate about that. In part, it is about preparing our students for what they do when they leave school. So for further education or for work. But I think that one of the areas that we're going wrong in at the moment is we're focusing too heavily on that. I think we're missing the importance of cultural literacy and helping our students to really understand and contribute to the world around them. Where people are saying the 4 capacities are right, they are right. We are looking to achieve those 4 capacities. But in my opinion, the best way to do that is to develop a broad, deep body of knowledge and skill in our students. So that, for example, when they walk into a museum or a gallery, they can understand what it is that they are seeing. They can make links in learning. That when they open a newspaper, they can understand what they are reading. They can critique it. They understand the left and the right bias that may come into it, for example. When we're thinking about critical thinking and creativity and problem solving, everything I read tells me that the best way to develop these things in our students is to focus on teaching them a rich body of knowledge, declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge that helps them to think and knowledge which helps them to do things. And that's what I mean about a common core. And that core will never be set. That needs to be thrashed out and debated, and it will change over time. But to me, it's a fundamental principle of equity. That we need to agree the core content in our curriculum so that we are ensuring equity of opportunity to enjoy life and contribute to society in the fullest way.
Thank you for taking us back to the why. What's that, sorry?
I think we need to keep coming back to the why. It's Suzanne's point, and I just think it was such an important point. We need to focus on the why.
Yeah. So what does that look like from your perspective, Lawrence? How does that translate for you, either around breakable plates?
So I was just thinking there as Bruce was speaking in terms of, the curriculum and the totality of the experiences we offer young people. And I think this takes me back to somewhere where I think OECD really nailed it well was where they said that we have this 21st century curriculum potentially, albeit with faults, but a 19th century assessment system regime, and I think that's one of the big tensions that we need to crack before we get anywhere. That really is, I think, impeding progress right now. So for as long as we continue measuring the things that we measure, rather than truly respecting the fact that every learner is unique and individual, requires a different pathway, a different suite of experiences, then I do think we're going to struggle with this debate. And if I go back to the point made earlier so eloquently by Lynn about early years, and I know the OECD report was looking very much at school-age education, but given the reform that we've gone through in early learning and childcare, and I have to say as a secondary practitioner, I've had a real awakening over the past 10 years into the power of early years. So if we're serious about reforming the curriculum as a real 3 to 18 inclusive experience for all learners, then I think we need to absolutely be looking at that entire experience, because the experience that young people are getting now in those preschool years are very, very different experiences to the ones they would have got previously in a traditional nursery setting. So I do think there has to be a much smoother, clearer transition for young people from with a variety of different unique talents and so on, to allow them to thrive when they reach school. So no clear answers there. One other thing I'll mention briefly, if I may, and this is one that I think about quite a lot when I think back to my own training as a teacher, was that I very much was trained to be a deliverer of the curriculum, and it was always someone else's curriculum you were delivering. And it goes back to Ollie's point about professional learning. How good are we at creating space and time and resources to allow teachers as professional experts to become architects, designers, developers of the curriculum, as well as just delivery people, if you like. So I think there is a lot of big debates swirling around in my head just now that I think need to be outed and considered more widely by the system.
And maybe that's where I can nudge the conversation slightly. It would be good to think about and to explore what are those tensions that we need to uncover and be open about, because any change or improvement or reform or whatever we want to call it has tensions in it, and it has unknowns as well. And I think it would be good to hear from your different perspectives and your different experiences. What are those tensions that you experience now or have experienced in the past, and how might we use those as we move forward? So I don't know who would like to jump in, perhaps Ollie or Nazhat. Is there anything sort of front of mind?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in with a few observations, I suppose. So first of all, I think that there's and Bruce has kind of hinted on this already, actually, but I think there's a real tension between our understanding of curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, and actually how all of these things go together. And we need to think about them as one going forward. I think coming through strongly in the OECD report is the talk around alignment between the BGE into the senior phase. I think that one of the reasons that, as being described, that some schools have got a very, very good curriculum, particularly in secondary, is because those are the schools that really understand what's possible with the senior phase. And I think that we just still need to look at what's possible within Scottish education and view the complexities as the flexibilities, and that's what allows us to give individual learning pathways for so many young people, and we see them thrive. Whereas we find a lot of schools that still have quite a traditional design in terms of kind of curriculum flexibility, and making that work. There's a real kind of tension there and thinking about that. I also think that we need to understand when we talk about aligning the BGE, to the examination or the assessment system around that. It's just trying to think about a little bit about what that means, and how that works. And in my mind, I think about it in terms of actually the approaches to assessment. Like, I find it strange, that for some national qualifications that you've got young people that are doing quite a lengthy, high stakes written assessment, where actually the very nature of that piece of work that they're doing is practical, like in nature. I always used to, talk a lot of conferences and things around the national qualification for woodwork. It's like, well, what real use is it, for a young person to be doing a multiple choice test where they're identifying a tongue and groove joint or a biscuit joint, you know, or a half-blind dovetail joint. I mean, it sounds like something from an ornithology class rather than a practical woodworking class, you know, around that. However, you know, can the young person create and make, you know, and do something around that? And that's the sort of thing that we should do. So when we're thinking about alignment, how are we assessing things like drama? How are we assessing English? How are we assessing things like maths? And why has that got to be the same across all of the qualifications? And we've got to be brave there, really, going forward as well. I think that there's a real tension around the associated school group, you know, and the cluster approach. For me, that's become far too often a primary, secondary school argument, rather than looking at, again, the totality of that experience and schools, talking to schools and maximising that. I think digital technology can really unlock, you know, some of the opportunities for young people to work and to learn together around that. And I also think that we need to have a real and honest and almost brutal conversation, you know, around teacher time. You know, around that, you know, if you look again at the OECD recommendations, people have been very, very quick in there in terms of redesigning the curriculum. But where's the debate around giving teachers the time to plan, to collaborate, to work with each other? And also, where is the debate around making sure that teachers have also got that time in order to implement the reform as well? Because those are two separate things as we go forward. And again, an additional in-service day to implement a big curriculum reform, you know, is not going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Ollie. There's certainly lots of tensions there. I'm going to go to Nishat and then to you, Bruce. I saw you put your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Linked to what Ollie is saying, then also what Lauren said about being part of designing the curriculum and not just the person to deliver it. As a teacher, I can tell you, I think a lot of colleagues feel still so constrained about what they are required to do year to year. I think they feel, again, that there is still so much tick boxing that we have to do, you know, on a regular basis. That adds that tension. And for me, one thing that I really want to promote is what we hear a lot of people speaking about is teacher agency. But where is that? How many teachers out there across the country really feel that they have that agency, that freedom to really develop their own curriculum within the classroom? So I agree with, you know, with what the panelists were saying about the fact that the Curriculum for Excellence itself, I think, did provide a really great framework. I think the openness and flexibility of it is a great advantage, but it will ultimately be down to the expertise and knowledge and experience and time that each individual teacher can dedicate, you know, to that particular E&O and where it goes. So I think there is a big debate about allowing us to develop our agency. So if you have staff members who have areas of real interest, you know, head teachers should be allowing them to develop that. So that should be part of the school improvement plan. What do the staff want to develop? And ultimately, of course, what the teacher develops, if they're in an area of expertise, wants to start a whole school project or a project in their classroom, ultimately that is going to benefit the learners. It is going to improve our school, which is what the school improvement plan is all about. I do think that, again, our emphasis on literacy, numeracy and health and well-being is important, but we're still looking at it in a very restricted way. We are not looking at it in an interdisciplinary way, you know, so we can look at health and well-being through drama, you know, and currently we are looking at climate action. We're all prepping for the COP26. We can do our maths through that, and we can do our speaking and listening exercises and building our confidence and doing presentations, writing letters, being activists. There is so much we can do, you know. So I don't see why we need to pigeonhole literacy, maths and health and well-being only. We should be, again, looking at developing the holistic teacher as well as, you know, the holistic pupil as well. So for me, I think that's a real practical kind of challenge. And I really think that if more of us had that time, like Ollie is saying, we do need that time to plan and to research and to develop our own agency. I think that in itself would improve morale so much, you know, because I think a lot of us feel that we are professionals, but are not treated as such a lot of the time. And so I think we really do need to develop that agency.
Yeah. And of course, that's the theme for tomorrow night's conversation as well. And you're absolutely right that these things are all connected and interrelate and have a dynamic relationship as well. Bruce, you've been nodding along there, and I see you, Suzanne. I've got you.
Yeah, nodding because I do agree, particularly with the point about time. And that is one of the key tensions in the system. If we're looking for our teachers to become curriculum developmenters, then as I think we could, then we need to give them more time. We're also expecting our teachers to do everything else that is associated with teaching, such as plan high quality lessons. So a real focus on pedagogy. So if we're asking teachers to focus on pedagogy, as we should be, but we're also asking them to design the curriculum, well, teachers need to be given more time to do that on a permanent basis. So that's a real tension in the system, I think. I agree with Ollie that we need to really consider what we mean by curriculum and pedagogy and assessment. And for me, I don't think typically I would separate pedagogy and assessment, because unless we're talking about the high stakes assessment at the ends of courses, assessment and pedagogy to me are just integral. It's that low stakes formative assessment that's just taking place all the time. I think there's a real tension between knowledge and skills in the minds of people, but I don't think there needs to be, because to me they're just two sides of the same coin. Skills are just knowledge in action, so it's just you doing something with the knowledge. So I think we need to consider what knowledge we're looking for our students to develop, and what is it we would like our students to be able to do with that knowledge. Mm-hmm. And the last tension is probably something I touched on earlier: the specificity versus vagueness tension. Because if you do what I'm suggesting and you become more specific in your curriculum, well, you can become too specific and you can narrow it to a point that it is limiting. But then if you're too vague, well, then for me, it leads to the inequity that I was talking about before, and it leads to confusion. So there's a happy middle, there's a sweet spot between specificity and vagueness that I don't think we've yet reached.
I wonder if we will. Suzanne, you had your hand up, waiting patiently.
I did, and I want to bring in a tension that I think we are not thinking about, but that relates to the pandemic that we have all just lived through, or are continuing to live through. I don't know why I've put that in the past tense. And in fact, I'm looking at the chat, and somebody identified as guest here has said, I start to wonder who the curriculum is for. Is it truly for the children, or is it to support our national identity and improve economic growth? Okay, that's a big question, and I want to bring in what I hope is even a bigger issue that I think we're not thinking about, that, but that for me comes back to my wider point about understanding biology and trauma and effectively making health and well-being not just a topic that we teach, but part of pedagogy, part of underpinning how we teach. Mm-hmm. Increasingly, I have been saying when I work with schools that I think that there's likely to be an impact of the pandemic that we've not yet planned for. And I think it will stretch for 3 cohorts and perhaps 5 cohorts. Okay. So if you go all the way back to early years and then to really, really early years, all the way down to birth, down to COVID babies, we have a whole group of children who have developed under circumstances of stress for a lot more of them than would have normally been the case. It won't be the case for all families, but a tremendous more number of children than would usually be the case have developed in these core early years in households where that were cramped, where domestic violence went up, where parental drinking went up. We're already seeing reports of speech and language delays across lots of 2 and 3-year-olds. If you're a COVID baby, then you've developed in the womb in the most crucial period of brain development, stress development during this time of stress. Okay, let me add one other thing. And I hear lots of early years settings that have been welcoming children into those early year settings without the parents having been in. So their introduction to an institution, the smell of it, the shape of it, the echoing off the walls, if that has been scary for them and nobody helps them with that, and it's embedded enough, then it changes the whole unconscious experience of what schools are and what teaching is. Mm-hmm. And then they carry that through. And so you end up with a whole cohort of children who move up, from early years to primary 1 to primary 2 to S1 to S2. And that will affect the way they can take in the curriculum, whatever is in the curriculum. Because if their stress levels are too high, and if too many of the children feel that way, then that disrupts the classroom. And when for the grown-ups, the pandemic becomes the past, for those children, they are truly carrying that in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so for all that that's not the curriculum, I'm just trying to stress the things that we might not have thought about, particularly in the coming decade, that if we're not thinking about what we have learned about human development, and that is most known to the early years sector, it is less known to primary, and in my experience, often not understood very well at all in the secondary levels. If we don't think about that, it will matter less what we're teaching, because we won't be able to adapt to the capacity of our youngsters to learn. And can I stress, I understand that that's not all of them. I don't mean that all the children were stressed, but I do mean that a higher proportion of children, I think, have been stressed by the pandemic than we may have been thinking about, and the biological changes that come with it. Mm-hmm. So since tonight was meant as a critical conversation, I just want to drop that in so that we are thinking about that whilst we plan changes and reforms.
And I think that's almost like being present in 3 time zones, if you like. We need to understand the past experiences. We need to understand the present reality and experiences of that reality. But also we need to think about the future, both in terms of what we can see and also what we can't yet see. And
if I add to that, if teachers don't know that, if the staff don't know that, if they don't understand what is happening in terms of behavior and the intersection with stress, then they just get frustrated. So we cripple their ability to be agents in the classroom and to create both a curriculum and to respond in the moment, a pedagogical sense, to what the children are bringing.
Yeah. And there's lots of things coming through in the chat just now, agreeing and resonating with what's coming up from all of you there who shared. I have half a mind on the time as well, and I want to kind of bring children and young people into the forefront of our mind a little bit more. And I recently read and both chatted with David Price, who wrote a book called The Power of Us. And in that book, he asks a question, and it's a question I'd like to kind of bring to this conversation and finish on as well, is how do we help young people to become fearless agents of their own destinies? How do we do that, and what does it mean for this conversation that we're having tonight around the curriculum? So I'm not saying it's a small question. I'm not saying we can answer it in the 10-15 minutes that are left, but I'd love, and I'm sure those who've given up their time this evening would love to hear your kind of thoughts and observations, and I'd love to hear from those who are listening as well. So who'd like to kick us off? Laura.
Yeah, happy to jump in, Sarah, thanks. So for me, it's about voice and agency for young people, as it is for teachers and other professionals as well. And we've got a great opportunity, I think, in this country of embracing, promoting, championing UNCRC in this very special year. But it has to go further than that and be about genuine participation and genuine voice and agency. I work a lot of the time with politicians, with elected councillors locally, and we involve young people regularly, but it's quite tokenistic. It's really not empowering them and asking their voices, asking for their views on things that really, really matter to them. So it has to be about really embracing UNCRC and really driving that forward. But equally, from a curricular perspective, going back to those 4 capacities. So yeah, successful learners, absolutely. That's what, we want our young people to be successful learners, but we also want them to be confident. We want them to contribute. We want them to be good citizens in a complex, diverse and multifaceted world. So make of that what you will, but that's my contribution to this one, Sarah. Thank you.
Lynn, can I invite you in next? Oh, you're on mute again. There we go.
I'm bursting to talk, so yeah, delighted to talk. The one thing I'm thinking right away is that, and just a combination of what many people have been saying, really we need to see who our children are and build on their interests. So, you know, we've got in our minds what we want to teach them, but I think that the really important thing for me would be what are they interested in and what do they need to learn. And I think that that's really key for me. And thinking about this question about how do we make them fearless agents. So I think it's that they need to know that we're trusting them and that we believe in their resourcefulness, their capacities, their capabilities. And actually, I'm not terribly sure that happens often. Certainly, I think in the early years, that's what we focus on. We look at children as unique individuals, and we build on that. And we, you know, I've often been told, because people will know that I'm from Cowgate Under 5 Centre. I've often been told when children go to primary school, they're a Cowgate child, and so watch out for them because they're very vocal. They make themselves known. They want to take part in things. And that's because when they've been at Cowgate, that's what they've done. And, you know, there's a really dialogic approach where the adult doesn't always know what's right. So the children can challenge the adult, and power is kind of not something that, you know, I'm totally aware that adults hold the power, but we try and negotiate that power with our children and sort of ensure that they've got a real say in what goes on. So we're here to talk about the curriculum, and certainly I definitely believe in the early years we see children influencing the curriculum, making changes, telling us what it should look like. And then, you know, I'm sad to say, because I know that lots of primary 1 teachers that are on this call will absolutely agree with me, but then they go to school and then the children have to fit into a mould. My own doctoral thesis revealed the fact that because I followed 16 children to 4 different schools, and the children had to fit into the curriculum, but they were confident enough to be able to do that. And I kind of feel, though, should they have needed to do that? You know, they could have been much more, and you know, I was really impressed with the questions that were raised prior to this actual call about how do we transform things, how do we push things forward. Well, the answer is in our children. If we really look, we really will understand, you know, what is going on for them. But, you know, I'm hoping that this conversation doesn't just end with us here. I'm really, really impressed with Lawrence, I have to say. I really loved the fact that Lawrence was kind of really emphasising the importance of the early years, because, I mean, I'm an early years person, but also the fact that Lawrence, as a director of education, is really acknowledging the value of that early years. If we really want to transform things, if we really are, because I'm aware that we've got primary people here, we've got heads from secondary here, but I feel that we really need to look at the early years, because in the early years, we look at children, we listen to them and respond to them. We don't think about the curriculum fitting around them. We think about them as the curriculum, and then we observe them, and then we link what they're doing to the curriculum. You know, it's a very different way to look at it, but it's a very rich way. And, you know, I was listening to what Bruce was saying about you know, what happens after the kind of becoming child, the one in the world. But if you look at the early years, we can actually almost say where children are going. You know, we know if they've got an interest in engineering, and we build on that. But somehow, some way, our curriculum knocks that out of them in primary 1 or 2 or 3. But in the early years, we all run with it. Practitioners all run with it, and it's a wonderful thing. It's really rich. And then Bruce maybe gets them in high school and thinks, actually, I've got to mold them for the world, for the neoliberal world. But actually, the child that ends up in Bruce's world is very, very different from the child that left the early years world.
Mm-hmm. Lynn, I can see you could go on talking for quite some time.
Sorry,
and certainly lots of people that would love to hear from you, but I just want to offer Bruce or Ms. Hatch the opportunity to come in, or both of them. You have to be very quick if you both want to do it. Bruce, on you go first.
All right, I'll be really, really quick. Yeah, I was trying to argue the point that the world is not just about the point that you leave school and what we consider that they might do when they leave school. That's one aspect of it. But for me, it's actually a smaller aspect than just that cultural literacy that I talked about before. So in that debate that we're having about the curriculum, I think as teachers, we need to consider what we think is potentially useful, what we think is interesting, what we think is important, and then balance that up by letting students have a voice in it as well. For me, that will give you something of a complete package.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bruce. Very succinct. Ms. Hatch, would you like to come in just there as well?
Yeah, I just want to actually mention, forgive me, I can't remember the exact source of this, but I'm sure I had read a news article in the last few days, which I found really fascinating, saying that young people at the moment are feeling very depressed about their future. And I think it is potentially to do with a lot of the talk, obviously around the 18 months that we've all lived through, and the problems that has created. We're still living through that. Also in terms of a lot of the discussion around the future of our planet and inequality and these kind of things. And for someone who specializes in, making a point of teaching the global goals and talking about unfairness and inequality, it really made me think about, are we depressing our children by the messages we're giving them because we want to try and encourage them to be agents of change to make it better? Are we putting too much pressure on their shoulders by saying, oh, you're the leaders of tomorrow, you're the scientists of tomorrow, you're the people of tomorrow? So, I just want to kind of make the point. I think we need to think about the kind of experiences we offer and the role models that we want to be. So yes, there are problems out there, but we need to give them the tools and the skills to consider how positively, we can challenge these things and face up to these things. And again, I think a good mix of a holistic curriculum can do that, whereas it's not all doom and gloom, but there is a lot of positivity out there and celebrating achievement. And I think it's absolutely fine as a teacher to, hold your hands up and say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. We'll discover it together. Let's work it out together. Let's research it together. I think there needs to be a lot more of that from the teacher's point of view as well, to really take them on board to say, if we have a problem, that's fine. We're going to solve it together.
Mm-hmm. And so if we come back to the why, it gives us a lovely framework for keeping all of that in balance. And so when we're in tension like this, I forever find myself coming back to what is the why, and I can line up the other stuff around that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm aware of time. I'm aware that there is another keynote. I think what tonight has done is shown us that there are lots of questions, there are many tensions, there are many positives, there are lots of unknowns about where we go next and what happens next. But actually the power of talking about it helps us to find and navigate a way through that. I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of the conversation tonight, and I hope that this is just the beginning of a much wider, deeper conversation that will continue to take place. Thank you to my colleagues on the screen tonight, and thank you to all of those of you who have joined from home or wherever you might be tonight. I will let you go, join the next keynote, or perhaps you're all going to be watching Bake Off tonight. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. Anyway, thank you so much, and it was lovely to see everybody. The obligatory way.
Bye.
Thank you.